when I firmly refused to let my in-laws access our joint bank account. My father-in-law, Harold, angrily shouted, "Who do you think you are after everything this family has done for you?" My husband, Leo, mumbled, "Maybe sharing one account isn't that bad." I didn't argue, but that very night, I made a resolute decision. And the next morning, when they opened the banking app, their screams echoed throughout the entire house. This happened over 2 years ago, but the feeling of it, the tight echo still lingering in my chest, has never really gone away. I still vividly remember the first day things started to shift, like a silent storm creeping in, without thunder or lightning, only the cold and gloom tightening around me. My name is Tessa, and I had just turned 36 that spring. I lived in South Carolina, where old oak trees draped in moss swayed with the evening breeze, and people still kept old habits like greeting their neighbors every morning. I wasn't the flashy type. I liked things to be clear, logical, grounded, perhaps because I worked in corporate accounting, and numbers were the only things that ever told the truth in this world. Before I met Leo, I didn't think I would ever get married. I was content with being single. I had a compact apartment that I designed myself. I had a workroom overlooking the balcony where each morning I brewed coffee and listened to jazz. I had good friends and regular video calls with my mother, a strong woman who raised me on her own without a single complaint. I lacked nothing except perhaps a little space for someone else to step into my life. Until I met Leo. Leo wasn't the kind of person you'd meet at a conference or a networking event. He worked part-time at a local coffee roasting shop, a job he called temporary, even though he'd been doing it for over 3 years. He wasn't great with finances, and truthfully, he was a bit awkward in conversation, but he had an honest smile and eyes that seemed to listen to the whole world. The first time we talked was when he accidentally spilled coffee on my shoes at a small cafe in the Arts District. He apologized no fewer than 5 times, then offered to buy me a new pair of shoes. I laughed, declined, and afterward, we shared a cup of coffee together. We dated for a year during which I experienced, for the first time, what it felt like to have someone make coffee for me in the morning, even if it was a bit weak. A year where I learned to stop working on Excel sheets every night and instead watch silly, heartwarming movies with someone. I never demanded that Leo be successful in the conventional sense. I believed in effort, and I believed that if two people were genuine, they could overcome anything. I once thought, this is the man I could build a life with, even if I had to be the one steering most of the time. I didn't mind that. I was raised by a mother who single-handedly brought me up without ever complaining. She never taught me to rely on anyone. She taught me to stand tall, even when the wind blew against me. And so we got married. A small, beautiful, meaningful wedding. I never dreamed of a grand gown or a honeymoon in Paris. I just wanted a warm ceremony and a kind vow. And in that moment, I believed I had found a partner, not perfect, but sincere. I never expected that our marriage would face hardship, and even less that what would crack it wouldn't be him, but his parents, Harold and Denise. I remember the first dinner at their house. Denise was overly sweet, as if every one of her smiles had been weighed and calculated. Harold, he didn't hide his coldness. When I spoke about my mother, the woman who raised me alone, he simply said, "No wonder you're so independent." I forced a smile. I thought, well, he's older, maybe just not used to women like me. I really tried to understand them. Sending flowers for birthdays, calling on holidays, gifting homemade baked goods at family gatherings. But it seemed my kindness only made them see me as weak. And from there, they started testing how far they could bend me. And Leo, the man who used to be my shield from the world, started to fade in that role. Little by little, from meals filled with scornful glances, veiled insults behind smiles, to the subtle remarks about how women shouldn't keep money to themselves, the storm slowly crept in. At the time, I didn't know how big the storm would be. I still thought I could turn things around. I didn't yet know that what I was facing wasn't just incompatibility, but a battle between control and freedom. The first time I stepped into Harold and Denise's house, Leo's parents, I came with a bouquet of flowers, a bottle of red wine, and all the goodwill of a future daughter-in-law. I told myself I would be polite, gentle, and respectful to them as elders. I never imagined that at that very first meal, I would learn my first lesson about what they called conditional kindness. Harold didn't stand up when I arrived. He simply looked me up and down, then said, without bothering to hide his skepticism, "So you're the one Leo said is independent?" I nodded, forcing a smile. I thought it was just a typical probing remark from a protective father. But no, that was only the prelude. When I shared that my mother, a single woman, had raised me on her own, Harold blinked as if he had just confirmed a long-held assumption. He said, "Ah, so no traditional family model. No wonder you're used to living alone." That comment dropped onto the dinner table like a heavy stone. I smiled it off, but inside it stung. Denise was different. She wasn't as direct as her husband, but her eyes couldn't hide the judgment. When I talked about the small company I ran, her gaze shifted from curious to wary. And then Harold added, "Modern women, so caught up in chasing careers they forget their calling as wives." I had never felt so out of place at a family dinner table. No one asked what I liked, what I dreamed of, or how I felt being in love with Leo. Every conversation revolved around them, their accomplishments, their expectations, and the standards they believed were non-negotiable. I thought, maybe it's just the first time. Maybe they need time to understand me. But I was wrong. The closer we got to the wedding, the clearer it became. Their kindness was never unconditional. They said they would help cover part of the cost. And true, they did send a sum of money. But along with it came a long list of musts and must-nots. They chose the venue, a large church they loved, without caring that I had wanted an outdoor ceremony. They scratched several of my closest friends off the guest list, claiming they looked inappropriate. And worst of all, Harold insisted on giving a speech at the wedding, and in that speech, he loudly declared, "A strong family always begins with a husband who's strong enough to lead." I stood there in my white wedding dress, hand gripping a wine glass, smiling. But inside, I knew I had just stepped into a marriage where the power lines had already been drawn, not between Leo and me, but between me and his family. I tried. I wrote thank you cards. I called to check in. I invited them over for dinner and cooked dishes Denise once mentioned she used to make for Leo. I bought theater tickets for Harold's birthday, even though he barely showed interest. I kept telling myself, it just takes time. Eventually, they'll see I'm sincere. But kindness to them was never enough. They didn't want a kind daughter-in-law. They wanted one who obeyed. And Leo, he stood in the middle, always smiling, always saying, "Don't mind them, my parents are just old-fashioned." But every time I took a step back, Harold took two forward. Every time I stayed silent, Denise pushed further. There were nights I lay with my back turned to Leo, hugging my pillow, wondering, am I trying to belong or being swallowed whole? I still believed Leo was different from them. I still believed he was someone I chose for love, not for a social role. But when the man you trust doesn't speak up to protect you, his silence cuts just as sharply as a blade. And I slowly realized, this was no longer about being a daughter-in-law. It was a test of boundaries. And if I didn't draw the lines for myself, no one else would do it for me. From the beginning of our marriage, Leo and I had sat down to talk openly about finances. I proposed that each of us keep a separate account and contribute to a shared fund according to our means. I earned more. That was the truth. I didn't mind paying the bulk of rent, utilities, even car insurance. I did it because I wanted to, not because I was forced to. At first, Leo agreed. He nodded with relief, as if he felt lucky to have a wife who knew how to manage money. I created a budget sheet, shared the payment schedule, and even set up a savings account for our future under my name, but with shared goals: buying a house, traveling, early retirement. Leo didn't contribute much, but I didn't mind. I thought, as long as he's moving forward with me, that's enough. But then things started to shift, not loudly, but in small, quiet drops, like rain seeping through cracked roof tiles. Leo began saying things like, "Dad says saving every penny is the only way to have freedom. Mom thinks we should start thinking about kids soon, before it's too late." I wasn't against saving. I've been doing that all my life. I wasn't avoiding motherhood either. I just wanted both of us to be truly ready. But there was one thing I couldn't accept: when he began using other people's voices to talk to me. The first time he brought up a joint bank account, I thought it was a joke. I chuckled, took a sip of tea, and said, "We're doing just fine, aren't we? There's nothing to worry about." He nodded. But just a few days later, he brought it up again, this time at dinner with his parents. That Sunday, Harold cooked a traditional meal: smoked barbecue, potato salad, and peach cobbler. Denise wore a lace-trimmed apron and walked around like the self-appointed queen of a domestic cult. I knew something was coming. The air always turned heavy when the subject of money came up. After just a few polite exchanges, Harold put down his utensils, looked straight at me, and said in a firm, cutting tone, "So you're really going to treat this family like strangers? Hiding a bank account too?" I froze. Denise shook her head gently, wearing an expression of disappointment, as if I had just desecrated some sacred bond. I turned to look at Leo, hoping he would say something, hoping he would defend me. Just once. Maybe with something as simple as, "Tessa's already done more than enough, Dad." But no. He just bowed his head, scooped up another bite of cold potato, and mumbled, "Sharing an account might not be such a bad idea." What I felt wasn't anger, it was cold. A chill that ran through every vertebra. A cold so sharp it made me laugh, a soft, polite laugh, behind which a silent storm began to gather. I nodded. I changed the subject. I still ate my piece of cobbler and wished Harold a good week ahead. But on the drive home, while Leo dozed off in the passenger seat, I no longer felt like I was sitting next to my husband, but rather next to a messenger of his parents' power, carrying the weight of generational pressure they assumed I wouldn't be strong enough to resist. When we got home, I said nothing. I didn't ask, "Why didn't you stand up for me?" Because I knew asking would only make the disappointment worse. I just watched him take off his shoes and turn on Netflix, as if dinner had never happened. Then I went into the study, opened my laptop, and began pulling up every financial file I had. I didn't know when love had turned into a weapon of demand. But I knew one thing for certain. If I didn't act now, the next thing wouldn't just be the bank account. It would be the house, the career, even my identity, pulled slowly into the hands of people who never truly cared for me. And it was on that quiet night, a Sunday night that seemed ordinary like any other, that I wrote the first lines of my strategic withdrawal plan. Leo fell asleep quickly that night. As always, he turned his back to me, pulled the blanket over his head, and started snoring softly like an innocent child. But I couldn't close my eyes. Not because I was angry, but because I had never been more awake. I stepped out of bed as if stepping off a stage where my role had come to an end. I opened my laptop. The desk lamp cast a soft light on my cheek, but every action, every mouse click, every password typed was like a blade cutting through the ties I had allowed others to wrap around my wrists for too long. I started with a shared savings account where I had deposited money each month: bonuses, salary, even my personal savings. Leo had contributed almost nothing, yet I had still included his name as a gesture of trust. This time, I transferred the entire balance into a private account under my name only, prepared beforehand, discreetly and legally. Next was the credit card. It had seemed like a convenient family tool, but in reality, I had been the one paying off nearly all the charges. I canceled it. No warning. No explanation. Because I no longer owed anyone an explanation. I accessed our banking profiles, shared budgets, and every financial app we had ever linked, every breadcrumb someone might use to track, control, or demand from me later. I revoked Leo's access, removed every email, deleted every shared permission. Lastly, I wrote an email to our landlord, requesting the lease be transferred into my name. I had always paid rent on time, kept the home clean, been respectful to neighbors. The landlord agreed within an hour. By the time everything was done, it was 2 a.m. I stood up, poured myself a glass of water, and looked at my reflection in the window. I didn't see a wife who had just betrayed her husband, as Denise would surely claim. I saw a woman who was finally standing up to protect herself. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual. Leo was still asleep. I had breakfast alone, unhurried, unashamed. I wore my favorite white blouse, dabbed on a bit of lipstick, and drove to work with the kind of spirit one has after surviving a storm, not soaked, but liberated. Around 9 a.m., my phone began to buzz. The first message was from Leo. Tessa, is there something wrong with the account? I can't log in. Then came a missed call from Denise. Then Harold. No one asked how I was. Only clear signs of panic. Not because they were worried about me, but because they were losing something they had always assumed was under their control. By noon, my voicemail inbox was full. I didn't answer any calls. I just watched the numbers flash on the screen with an odd sense of calm. No tight chest. No rage. Just a deep silence, as if for the first time in years, I could finally hear the sound of my own voice. And that voice said, finally, I did what I should have done a long time ago. It all began with subtle signs, but nothing about it was accidental. One morning, as I walked to my car to head to work, I found a church flyer tucked neatly under the windshield wiper. No note, no return address. Just one bold line printed in glaring red Gothic font. A wise wife always submits. Beneath it was a familiar Bible verse about obedience in marriage, a twisted version of faith, if you ask me. I looked around the parking lot. Empty. No one in sight. But I knew exactly who was behind it. A few days later, I received an email from an anonymous address. The subject line was simple: repent. The message was a self-righteous paragraph. Marriage is a sacred commitment. A wife's disobedience will lead to destruction. A stranger could have sent that, but it would take someone who knew me well to choose such targeted, manipulative phrasing. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I created a separate folder in my inbox and labeled it them to save every trace of proof that their attempts at control had moved beyond the family. It had crossed the line into my personal life, my career, my private space. Then Harold called my office directly. My assistant, a young, enthusiastic woman, walked into my office with a puzzled look. Tessa, there's a man on the line. Says he's your father-in-law. He's a little aggressive. Do you want me to handle it? I nodded, but he had already left a message. I don't know who you think you are. My son loves you. We welcomed you into this family, and now you dare turn your back, take everything, and make it yours? You're a manipulator. A selfish woman. I listened. I didn't rewind. I didn't play it again. But inside me, everything had become cold and clear. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about control. From the snide remarks at family dinners, to demands for access to my finances, to religious guilt wrapped in fake virtue, and now outright threats in my professional space. This was a machine, and it was running with one purpose only: to make me back down, to make me shrink, apologize, and hand over power to them, people who believe that being men, being older, being family by blood, gave them the right to dictate my fate. I sat silently in my office, sunlight streaming through the window. Outside, the world kept turning as if nothing had happened. But inside me, a door had closed, and another, stronger one, was beginning to open. I no longer felt confused. I wasn't angry. I had only one thing left: clarity. They didn't want harmony. They didn't care about love. They wanted power. And I was no longer their prey. When Leo suggested we sit down to work things out financially, I knew it wasn't a simple conversation. It was a battle without bullets, but whoever had the numbers would win. I came to the meeting at a quiet cafe near our home, carrying a thick folder. I had prepared everything: bank statements, a detailed breakdown of contributions, legal documents, and the budget spreadsheets I had updated every single month since we got married. Every number had proof. Not to humiliate Leo, but to show him clearly who had been carrying the weight of this marriage. When I placed the folder in front of him, I spoke gently but firmly. You've contributed 11% of our living expenses over the past 2 years. The rest was covered by me. And I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it to remind you who's been asked to give more and who's now being questioned. Leo didn't look at the documents. He just lowered his head, eyes red. Maybe he felt ashamed. Maybe he felt caught between two sides. I wasn't expecting an apology. I only wanted him to listen. And then my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't expected, Nina. I had only met Nina, Leo's older sister, once, during our first Christmas together. She lived in another state and rarely visited. I still remember that day, when I was washing dishes, and Nina came up to me quietly and said, "Be careful with Harold. He doesn't yell. He waits until people trust him, then he breaks them." Back then, I just smiled. Now, I understood exactly what she meant. I answered, "Nina didn't waste time. I heard what happened between you and Leo. You need to know the truth about the trust fund." I frowned. "What trust fund?" She sighed, like she had been waiting years for the chance to say this. "My father set up a trust in Leo's name when he was still in college. It was originally meant to be long-term savings for buying a house, investments, or emergencies." I went still. Leo had never mentioned this to me. Nina continued, "But it's my parents who control the entire trust. They're the ones who approve every transaction. Leo knows nothing about it. They told him the money was gone, used up on tuition, a car, failed investments. All kinds of excuses. But the truth is, the money is still there." I had to stand up from the table. My heart pounded like a hammer against my chest. I stepped outside, breathing deeply, the phone still pressed to my ear. "So why are you telling me this?" I asked. Nina's voice softened. "Because I was once you. I was married to someone under their control. I let them ruin my life without even realizing it. And because you're the first person who's dared to stand up, they're afraid of you." I don't know how long I stood there on the sidewalk. Everything around me blurred and faded. In my mind, fragments of memory started piecing themselves together into a complete picture. Why were Harold and Denise so obsessed with the bank account? Why did they cling to Leo at every holiday, whispering with fake concern? Why did they resist me managing the finances, but insist I share everything? Because they weren't afraid I'd take the money. They were afraid I'd lead Leo toward the light. They had built a prison around him, disguised as family, as protection, as sweet funds hidden away. And I was the first one to knock on that wall and call the truth by its name. The mediation room that day was on the second floor of a private law office. Not big, not fancy, but quiet enough that I could hear the scratch of every pen stroke, every tense breath behind the closed glass door. The scent of fresh paper mixed with stale coffee and something else. Maybe the smell of confrontation after years of pretending. I arrived early, wore a white blouse and simple black trousers, my hair pulled into a neat bun. I wanted to appear calm, even as a storm churned quietly inside me. In my hands was a thick file, evidence not just of finances, but of manipulation. Harold and Denise arrived afterward. Harold still wore his pious expression, but his eyes betrayed caution. Denise looked at me like I was a stain on her carefully curated life. Then Leo walked in, slowly, his gaze avoiding mine. He sat down, hands trembling, shoulders hunched like a schoolboy dragged into a parent-teacher meeting. The mediator, a composed woman with salt and pepper hair and calm eyes, opened with a familiar line. "Today's mediation is intended to create mutual understanding, minimize harm, and most importantly, uphold honesty." I took a deep breath and nodded. "Then I'd like to begin." I opened the file and pulled out a printed email I had saved weeks ago. I slid it to the center of the table, where everyone could see. At the top, in bold letters, was the subject line. Plan. Make her look mentally unstable. I said nothing more. I let the silence speak for itself. Denise went pale. Harold lunged for the page as if to snatch it away. But it was too late. The mediator had already picked it up and was reading it carefully. It was just a joke between me and my wife. Harold attempted to break the tension, his voice unsteady. "We were just worried about Leo. She's too distant, too controlling. Are you talking about me? Or yourself?" I interrupted, for the first time since the meeting began. Then the door swung open. Nina walked in, carrying a large folder. I knew she would come, but even so, her presence struck me with quiet emotion. No greeting, no pleasantries. She simply placed the folder in front of the mediator. These are financial documents showing signs of tampering along with my forged signature, committed by our parents. She looked directly at Harold. You used my name to open a sub-account, to move trust fund money without informing anyone. Here's the proof. Harold shot up from his seat. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't let them manipulate you. But Nina stood her ground. Her eyes never left his. No one's manipulating me. I'm just not afraid anymore. The room turned heavy. Leo sat silently, hands covering his face. Then he broke down in tears. For the first time in our entire marriage, I saw him cry, not because of work stress, not because of conflict with me, but because of a truth he could no longer deny. I'm sorry. I didn't know, he said, voice cracking through the stillness. I didn't turn to comfort him, not because I was angry, but because I no longer saw the need. I had passed through the anger, through the screams I never voiced, through the desire to be defended, to be seen. I had come to understand. The only person I needed to stand up for me was me. No one else could do that in my place. I gathered the copies, closed the file, and calmly said, this marriage once had love, but I didn't enter it to become property. And I certainly won't stay in it to be controlled. Harold said nothing. Denise didn't either. They just sat there, like two statues stripped of their glossy paint. The mediator concluded the session with a brief note. All parties will need time to review the evidence before a final decision is made. But I knew my decision had been made long ago. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need anyone to speak on my behalf. I had the truth. And the truth doesn't require justification. It didn't end with a slammed door, but with complete, utter silence. The lawsuit was withdrawn. The accusations were never repeated. The tracking software was formally investigated. And Harold, the man who had once manipulated everything from behind the curtain, was now shunned by the very community he used to control. Leo and I signed the separation papers on a softly drizzling afternoon. He cried. I didn't. Not because I was heartless, but because my tears had dried up long ago. On those nights, I quietly erased my name from every system they once used to keep me tethered. I moved to Chattanooga, bought a small house with a backyard full of lavender. Every morning, I make coffee for one person, myself. And that feels fuller, more complete than anything I ever tried to build in that old house. I still remember that morning when they discovered the account was empty. Not because of the money, but because, for the first time, they had to accept that their power was over. I didn't just withdraw the funds. I withdrew myself from their control, and I never went back.